So, welcome everybody to What to Do About the House in Divorce. And there are so many, we really thought this would be kind of a really interesting topic because there are so many aspects to the house in terms of the timing and the emotional overlays and the legal context and when and how and why and all of those sorts of things. So, but before we get into it, I want to introduce everybody to our co-panelists. Laurel Starks is a recognized court-appointed expert in trained, neutral, and family law cases involving real estate matters. Her focus on divorce-related real estate has led to over $200 million in sales volume throughout Southern California and is often regarded by her peers as the pioneer of the divorce real estate niche. And Laurel has advised, consulted, and testified in hundreds of divorce cases and facilitating the sale of real property, as well as providing fair market valuation reports and testimony there too. She's spoken nationally on those topics. And Dr. Ann Gold Buscho is a licensed clinical psychologist in Northern California who specializes in family issues and issues related to divorce, parenting planning, and co-parenting counseling. She has professional and personal experience in nesting, co-parenting, step-parenting, and single parenting issues. And she also has presented widely at state and national conferences. Ann Buscho, Laurel Starks, welcome so much. I'm really excited and pleased that you're joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
And so before we get started, I just want to say for the participants, if you've got questions, if you could use the Q&A, then I will try to make sure that we get those questions answered. And also, we're going to finish in an hour's time because I want to respect the time of our panelists as well as the time of our attendees. That's not a lot of time, but I think it's enough to cover a lot of the major issues, like at least the high points. And if people need further information, they can contact one of us or somebody else if they're choosing. So let me just frame the issue a little bit in terms of the house and divorce. You know, the house is so much more than just a major asset of the marriage. You know, it's often the significant asset, but it's not just an asset. It's not just like money in the bank. Or a retirement account. It is it's home, right? So it has an emotional feeling of home for not only the parties, but their children. And it can feel incredibly disruptive to divide it up in some way that means selling it or something else like that. And people can feel really distraught at the idea of having to move themselves or having to dislocate their children, but also having all of their assets tied up in a property that somebody else is living in. And so there are some smart things, there are some not so smart things, and there's some timing things also. So sometimes people wonder, when can I move out? They're desperate to move out, but their lawyer is saying, no, you cannot move out yet. And so the issues of where people are going to live are also tied up in this issue around the house. So it's a really complicated issue. And you know, it's very interesting. I really want to talk about the emotional overlays. And I've also been noticing in a lot of my cases since the beginning of the pandemic that at least in New York, where I am, and I guess I didn't introduce myself, but I'm Katherine Miller, and I'm the founder of the Miller Law Group, and we are a family law firm based in New York City and Westchester County, New York. And I've been working in this area for over 35 years. And in the last couple of years, I've noticed that, and this is a very two-dimensional issue, but it's challenging, that appraisals, when one person is going to buy the other person out of the house, are all over the place. I mean, I have them millions of dollars apart on the same asset in the same period of time. And Laurel, I'm wondering, what is your experience with that and why is that happening? Or if it's happening in your area as well?
It's happening all over the country and it's a huge problem. What the market value is determined by, data that we support as comps and that sort of thing is very different than what I would almost say the emotional value is to home buyers just in general, as well as if that home buyer is someone who's getting a divorce and wants to keep the house. There's an emotional value there to it. So anytime you see low supply, high demand, and it creates a scarcity environment, values just become very difficult to accurately quantify. One of the bigger, there are many issues that go on with it. There's obviously the family law issue, which is you go get an appraisal, or maybe you get two appraisals, or however it is in the settlement process that you decide, okay, this is the value we're going to put on the house. And then you back out all of the expenses and the mortgage and, whatever. And you decide, okay, this is how much equity there is. And then you use that figure and you say, all right, well, there's this amount of equity in the house. Well, now we're going to settle other assets based on the fact that there's this much equity in the house. Then we're going to, divide the other property or other assets in other ways. And we think that we're going to have this much money to walk away with, et cetera. Then the party who's keeping the house does a refi, and then they get a mortgage appraisal. And now that mortgage appraisal is vastly different than what the appraisal was or the agreed upon value was, several months ago, or maybe it was even just a month ago. It's very different. So now that impacts the person's ability to get a loan and to adhere to the order or the agreement that was made in the settlement process. So it's a big problem. I mean, appraisals are a very, very, they're a real sticky wicket. I can tell you what not to do, and what not to do is to utilize any sort of an automated valuation tool. So don't go to Zillow, don't go to Redfin, don't go to, any of these types of things, because if experts who are walking the property, measuring the property, researching the property, spending hours analyzing it, if experts are having a challenge, you can only imagine how far off these automated valuation tools are. So I would definitely say not to do that.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I wanted to say, because many times people come into my office and say, well, I Googled this and I think you're wrong, on some family law issue. And it's like, yeah, there is some great information out there on the internet, but it's just a guideline, a way to think about it. You can't really just say, this is what's going to happen in my situation because this is what Zillow said, or, this is what this other website said. So,
right.
So I interrupted you. We're going on. So one thing to do is to not go to Zillow or similar kinds of online tools to figure out the value. And my understanding about those is that you can influence the value of your home on those sites by inputting various different things. So how much could it really be that accurate?
Well, and I don't want to get too much off on a bunny trail, but the reality is that the motivation of these websites, especially Zillow, is something that is far beyond anything that most people are understanding. Zillow is becoming a big player in purchasing homes, in buying up properties, selling properties. So their motivation for inflating values as Zestimates is very self-serving, and it serves their business model. They came out with Zestimates for the purposes of driving traffic to their website, to get numbers to their website so that they could charge premiums for advertisers. Bottom line, pure and simple, they admit it. That's the reason why they did Zestimates. It's not because they have, they care about being accurate. The only reason they care about somewhat accuracy is because they become the laughing stock in the industry. And so they don't want to be seen as this complete, idiot site. But, Zillow doesn't know what's going on inside the four walls of your house. Zillow doesn't know whether or not you back up to a power line. They don't know whether or not the house is completely, if it stinks to high heaven because you've got 19 cats living in it. Zillow doesn't know any of that. So all of those things impact values massively.
Yeah, that's good information. So Dr. Ann Buscho, speaking of within the four walls of the house, that's where the home is and where the children are living as well as the parents. And how disruptive do you think it is for children to have to move because of the divorce?
How disruptive is it? it's extremely disruptive. For kids, their home has been their safe place, their sanctuary. I think for the most part, unless there's been abuse or neglect or some trauma in the home, it is pretty disruptive. And what parents can do about that is to help prepare them for the move and maybe do a ritual, a separation ritual. The kids are attached to a home in the same way that adults are, and that we have a relationship with our home. And it's a relationship that's built over time. With all of those memories and hopes and dreams, and kids have that too. So leaving, it's hard for them. And, I think about, I have a 97-year-old dad, and we talk about moving him out of his home, and he would rather die than leave his home. So it's not just divorce, and it's not just kids. The attachment to the home is deep, and it can feel like an emotional amputation, if you will, when you're forced to sell. I think this is why there's so much contention around selling the home in divorce, because we don't talk enough about the emotional attachment to the home and the community, the neighborhood, and so on. And that a lot of the fight is because we haven't looked at that subjective value. We haven't appraised the home subjectively. It's not just about money. It's that emotional attachment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that feels right, so it's not just sort of a thinking thing, but that feels right. And at the same time, it's really a challenge, because a home that is affordable to a two-parent or two-earner family, or even to a family living with one earner under the same roof, so they have the economies of scale because they're living together, may be not affordable or barely affordable when parents separate, and whether or not the children are going back and forth between two homes, or the children are in this bird nesting situation where they stay in the home and the parents go back and forth, but other places are needed, and that one might be less expensive. It can, it's often a kind of we have to lose our lifestyle in order to hold on to the home, right? And one person may really be suffering because a lot of his or her assets are wrapped up in the home, and they can't really establish another suitable home or similar home outside those. So how do you think people should balance those things? Because those are all kind of important things, I think.
I've seen it happen in different ways. For one thing, I think when one parent really wants to keep the home and the other parent agrees that it's helpful to have the children be in the home that they've always lived in, I mean, that can work out pretty well. But what I've noticed is that the kids never really get as attached to the new home as they have been to the home that they grew up in or that they were born into. Even though I like to say that home is where the parents are, the attachment to the home is different when they come into a home later in childhood or as teens. I've seen clients, so I'm a collaborative coach, and I've seen clients have that conversation that it feels more balanced if they sell the home and they each get a somewhat comparable new home. That feels more balanced to them, because the parent who might move out and leave the home to the other parent can be very resentful about that, and it can cause a lot of grief down the road.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is that it really depends a lot on the age of the kids. So if you've got a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, I think what you're saying is they're more adaptable than a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old, or a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old.
Yeah, I think that's quite true.
Yeah.
And again, if there's been abuse or a lot of conflict in the home, it might be a relief for both kids and parents to leave that home. It might be, a toxic environment for them. So it isn't always a difficulty for them to move out.
So Laurel, how have you had people work creatively to make two homes and physically, Anne is there talking about the sort of emotional ways in which we're thinking about the home, but have you worked with people to create a situation physically where they make one home into two homes, not like literally the same home, unless that's one of the options, What has been your experience with that?
Yeah, so I want to acknowledge what the doctor said, that it is the toll that children take when going through this is quite massive. You know, I'm the lady that walks in the house and the kids see, and I'm the lady that's taking their house away from them. And I don't, you know, I I go into their rooms, I see their eyes, I see the fear, I see all of it. And it is something that you never, get quite comfortable with. And there's something that is very that's interesting. It's called the Opportunity Atlas. I don't know if either of you have utilized this or not, but you can just Google it. And it is a study, and it's a heat map of the whole United States and all of the different neighborhoods. And it shows the differences in affluence and, median income, et cetera, et cetera. And it talks about where children grow up, it directly impacts their trajectory in life. And I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that, right? But when we're talking about what the conversation is today, where you have one amount of income, whether it's double income or not, there's a dollar figure that is coming into the household to support the one household. And then when there's a divorce, if you take that same dollar figure and then now you have to apply it to two households, it doesn't stretch as far. In addition, you've got other expenses that are, in play. The cost of the divorce itself, like you indicated, the economies of scale. Now you've got, individual cell phone accounts. You've got individual insurance, et cetera. So you don't get that, the bulk rate, right? Family rate. And so the probability that a family, when they get a divorce and when they sell the house, the probability of those children moving into a, sort of a lesser socioeconomic neighborhood is through the roof. And it impacts it, studies show that it impacts the trajectory of their lives. So it's understandable for one spouse to want to keep the house, and maybe even for the couple. And I'm collaboratively trained as well. For couples who can make sensible decisions on their own regarding these, the future of their family is commendable and certainly recommended. But it's something that if the family decides to let one spouse keep the house and let the children stay there at least until they graduate, makes perfect sense. My only caution there is to consider, number one, that the party keeping the house can afford it, and not just the mortgage, but I mean all of the things that go along with it. If you're living in a house that's 5,000 square feet, it's a lot more money to heat and cool and replace a roof than it is, an 1,800 square foot condo type thing. So that's something to consider. Can you really afford it? Or is it the emotions that are inflating the value? The other thing to consider is making sure that the mortgage is severed and that title is severed, because for a spouse living out of the house, when they're on a joint mortgage, that mortgage follows them around. Whatever happens to that mortgage follows them around. So if payments are late, if it goes into foreclosure, if there's anything that goes on, it impacts that out spouse. And so I see probably half the cases where they didn't sell the house. We did a little research project in my office, just with in our local area, about half the cases where they didn't sell the house, 5 years later, they were still on a joint mortgage and or joint title. So there are a lot of risks that come along with that. And I would caution anyone to be very aware, eyes wide open before considering that arrangement.
Yeah, and I think that people should really rely on lawyers to really think that through as well, because there are ways in which we can protect I think you called him the outspout, right? The outspouse, the spouse who leaves the home and co-owns, because I mean, I have concerns about that arrangement lasting a really long time. So let's go back to the 4-year-old. If you're saying, okay, well, we're going to co-own the house until this 4-year-old goes to college, so 14 years, like that's a lot of risk for both people to reach conflict going forward. And when I'm thinking about resolving a divorce, and most divorces in New York, it's 97%, but nationwide, 95% of divorces settle before a judge makes a decision after a trial. So people are making their own arrangements. And it can be really tempting at the end just to get it done, and without really taking the time and having the patience to think through the consequences of each of these things. So if you're talking a couple of years, under 5 years, even 5 years is a really long time to co-own an asset that's also going to be a burden, right? Because it's going to have a boiler problem or a roof problem or a leak problem, or you're going to have a little fire, or there's going to needs to be painted, all of those kinds of things and how that's going to happen. And it's even just if everything is perfect on the mortgage, Laurel Starks, as you point out, even if the person it's paid, it still takes up a lot of your credit and limits your ability to purchase something else.
Absolutely.
So, looking to find some kind of arrangement that maximizes the benefits of the house from an economic perspective, from a child perspective, and a stability perspective, without disrupting so many of the other things. Dr. Ann Buscho, what are some things that people can do to think creatively around the house and the home?
I was thinking about some clients that I had a few years ago who were older and they had adult children. And we don't often talk about the effect of divorce on adult children, but that's profound also. And they had a family home that really they didn't need to keep anymore because their children were grown. So they decided to sell the home, but one wanted to stay in Marin County, which is a pretty expensive area to live, and the other wanted to move further away to an area which is really just as nice, but much less expensive. So they sat down and decided that they were going to buy similar houses, even though the prices of those houses was quite different, because they wanted their adult children to feel equally comfortable and at home in both houses, whether they were visiting mom in an expensive area or dad in a less expensive area. So that was pretty creative. They shopped for the two houses together. And they chose homes that were comparable. So that was, I think, one of the more creative solutions that I've seen.
Mm.
I wanted to talk a little bit more about that attachment to the house, though, just for a moment, because there's another story I wanted to tell, which is a divorce where the attachment to the home was profound, and it was only when they were settling their personal property that they invited me to come and help them, when they were literally dividing it up. And when I was there and they showed me around, it turned out that the wife had had a miscarriage and had buried the fetus in their backyard.
Mm.
And it had never been talked about, it had never come up, but you can imagine the attachment to the home because of that.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where I think it's so important to probe a little bit. What does this house mean to people? What's the non-monetary value? What will they lose by leaving it? What do they think they'll lose? Mm-hmm. So that story, I think, also was a lesson for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, our clients, my experience is that my clients have taught me so much over the years about so many things, and I'm so grateful for that opportunity to expand the way I would have thought about things otherwise. But, just to go back to the adult children thing, I think that it's in an intact family, oftentimes the parents will just look around their 5,000 square foot house and go, wow, this is a lot of house for us, right? And sell. And that's not the easiest thing for adult children without a divorce, right? So when you add into it this idea that my parents are divorcing and and this is going to be a real challenge. Where am I going to go for Thanksgiving when I come home from college? Where am I going? Who's going to be invited to Christmas morning? To open presents with the grandkids. I mean, that is a super big challenge, I think, for adult children. And so, Dr. Ambushko, I really appreciate you're raising the challenge of it is for adult children. And I'm wondering also about what kinds of creative parenting plans people can put into place to maybe preserve the home and not incur this cost of two equal homes, equally expensive, equally large homes that I think almost no one who gets divorced, there are a few, but almost no one who gets divorced can afford to live separately in the same way they were living together. And so I know that bird nesting is something. Could you talk a little bit about that and how that works?
Sure. So bird nesting is an arrangement where the children stay in the family home and the parents rotate in and out, taking care of the children. And I've read a lot of articles about it, and they mostly talk about how bird nesting can fail. And I think the reason is that people don't know how to do it. And so I wrote the book. So the book is The Parent's Guide to Bird Nesting. And I think with specific, documented, pretty detailed agreements, almost any couple can nest with their children. It keeps the kids stable. It keeps their routines consistent. They're not going in and out. They're not going back and forth. So the kids get to live their lives more or less undisrupted. They will have one parent at a time. That will be the biggest change. For parents, it gives them time. It gives them a break from the conflict, but it also buys time for them to decide what are they going to do next. Are they going to divorce or not? It's also kind of a soft startup to the divorce. It gives everybody time to sort of prepare themselves emotionally for the chore that the legal divorce is. It's so important with so many big decisions and so much information that they have to take in, that it helps for them to have some time to kind of settle down emotionally so that they can face that. I've seen people nest with their children for years. In the book, I interviewed a family that nested for 6.5 years, even after the children went to college. That when they came home, they came home to the same family home, and the parents were rotating and sometimes together, being with them for the Christmas holiday, for example.
So just for our listeners who don't maybe know what bird nesting is, it's an parenting arrangement where the children stay in the home and the parents go back and forth on a schedule. And it doesn't have, it's often 50-50, but it doesn't have to be 50-50, right? It can be just the same parenting plan that they might have in separate homes, but they just have it in terms of who's the on-duty parent.
I think that it hinges on both parents being committed to being involved as parents. So if one arrangement that wouldn't work would be with a parent who's completely career focused and let the other parent do the child rearing, and that wouldn't be a good candidate for bird nesting, but most can, and they do need a very specific schedule that's tailored to their needs and their kids' needs.
And Laurel Starks, have you ever worked with a bird nesting family in terms of finding them an alternative or place? Because sometimes, in my experience, the parents share a second residence. That strikes me as challenging, right? And sometimes they go to family or friends, and they kind of just sleep on a couch somewhere in a spare bedroom. And sometimes they actually have smaller residences, somewhere else. Have you worked with families to kind of structure this from an actual lease perspective?
I actually have not worked with them structuring it on the front end. Where I have come into play when there has been a nesting arrangement was when the nesting time was up and they needed to go ahead and sell the family home. So I've come into arrangements there, and I'm thinking they're rare. They're not that common in the grand scheme of things. And I think that they probably may exist a little bit more. This would be just my guess that they exist a little bit more in an area where the family, where they can afford really to have 3 places to live. And I could be wrong about that. I could absolutely be wrong about that. Though in the few cases that I have been involved in where it was time to sell the home, they had either been renting. I think there was maybe one that had bought a condo. So I don't know that it's so much where, in my experience, they've not both purchased other places. It's been more of a rental, or maybe they're living with someone type of a situation.
Yeah, I mean, when there's another significant other that they can sort of cycle in and out of, I think that makes sense to do that.
During COVID, people were nesting within the home, and that became true. When I thought it through, it's absolutely possible if people have the space and the willingness to rearrange the home, perhaps maybe double kids up in a bedroom so that each parent can have their own bedroom. But because of COVID, there were families that were pretty acrimonious, that were in a sense forced into nesting. It wasn't something that they chose. But even if it only lasts for a few months, whatever the nesting arrangement is, it is not a failure. It's a gift to the children to have that additional time to get used to having one parent at a time, to have their lives stabilized and have their parents calm down. So right now, most of the people that I'm working with are either sharing an apartment off-site or in the home, sharing a different part of the home, converting a garage, converting an attic. But there are ways that people are doing that. You're right that it would take a lot of money to support 3 homes. That would, for sure. That would be hard. And most people I know haven't had to do that.
And I do have several where they are both, and they have for quite some time, both lived in the same home together. And sometimes it's, maybe there's a downstairs ensuite, and you've got maybe mom's living there and takes up most of spends her time, downstairs, and maybe dad is upstairs, or vice versa, or whatever it is. But when you put it that way, Dr. Ann, yes, there are several cases that I've had, and again, it's ordinarily it's due to money that they need to cohabitate there together, and hopefully, in some situations it can become toxic for the children, and then in other cases they're able to manage rather fine and keep the kids in a stable environment.
Yeah, I'm going to go on and talk about timing, but before we do, I think that in terms of the toxic environment, my understanding is that studies show that conflict is the highest predictor of post-divorce dysfunction in children, right? And so I think that nesting, really, the rules, if any of our listeners are interested in this process, I definitely encourage you to read Dr. Ann Buscho's book, because I think that there are things that it can be so tempting to say, oh, goddamn your father, he didn't empty the dishwasher again. And it might just be sort of you might even remember saying it, right? And I'm not saying that anybody here would say that, but it is very tempting to just these things slip out, and your kid is listening, and it's just the dishwasher, right? But it can be super annoying. I can't believe she didn't buy milk. Can you believe this? Yeah, I have no milk for my coffee, and it's your mom's fault or whatever. So, do you have either of you quick comments about that and how to make it as seamless for the kids as possible?
Yes, of course. I think very explicit, detailed agreements that cover the things that matter most, like emptying the dishwasher if that's important, changing the linens if that's important, or making sure the laundry is done. I think one of the agreements that they often don't talk about is whether you can bring dates or new partners into the home, and that is a big no-no. And I would really encourage people to explicitly agree that they will never bring dates or new relationships into the home. If they have a clear on-duty, off-duty schedule, then they can do their dating and so on when they're off duty. Yeah. In terms of the agreements that I worked with one family where the agreement included a 2-page long list of groceries that each parent wanted to make sure was in the house when they came in. And the same thing with sharing an apartment, they would need to also have agreements about the condition in which they would leave the apartment and not bring dates there and so on.
Right. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that really can be tempting at the end just to rush it and assume that you know what we're talking about, but really talking it through and being crystal clear and minimizing assumptions, because you know what they say about assumptions. So I have a couple of questions about timing, you know, and one of those things is like, when is it time for the couple to separate? And it used to be in New York, and to some extent still is, that early on in the divorce process, it's very uncomfortable for the people, the spouses, the couple, to live together, whether or not they're children or not. And one person really wants to leave, or one person really wants the other person to leave. And so we get this question all the time, you know, can I move out? And it used to be that when before New York was a no-fault state, there was no guarantee that the person who wanted the divorce was going to be able to get it, barbaric as that sounds, right? And so you don't want to be married anymore, but you have to be, because you can't prove cruel and inhuman treatment or adultery or abandonment. And abandonment, leaving the house without permission, was something that would allow you to get divorced after a period of time. And so as lawyers, we were in the constantly uncomfortable position of saying to clients who desperately wanted to leave, this is really horrible. We're fighting in front of the kids. It's horrible for them. It's horrible for us. No, you can't leave. And now, because it could be construed as an abandonment, and where there might not have been a cause of action for divorce, and I don't need to get too deep into the sausage factory, you are potentially putting yourself at a legal disadvantage. And we still get that a lot. I get that in the office all the time. Well, I talked to a lawyer who said, don't leave and don't, you know, this. And it's kind of an interesting thing for all of the three of us in terms of the professional perspective that we have. Because on the one hand, status quo, when you get into court, and even when you just get into negotiations, the status quo is not irrelevant, right? So if one, you know, dad is left or mom is left and the other parent is left as the primary parent, you know, the kids are getting used to that. And if it's working and you end up in court in a custody battle, there's a very good chance the judge might just say, that's working, let's just keep doing that. You know, unless it's, and so like that is a bit of a challenge. At the same time, this is terrible for everybody to stay in a toxic situation. And financially, you know, it might work, but you know, they're going to be fighting all the time. So I'm wondering, from each of your perspectives, what you think about the timing and when's a good time. And along those lines also, Laurel, is this sort of idea of when the house is ready to be presented for the market. You know, sometimes people are like, well, we have to redo the kitchen and the bathrooms because no one's going to buy it, or we're going to maximize our value if we do that, where another one is like, no, we're just going to slap a coat of white paint on it and we're going to be done. So anyway, thoughts?
Yeah, you know, I'm just, as you're talking, I'm thinking about, you know, the houses I was just in this past weekend as I'm doing walkthroughs, and they all had both parents living there. They all had kids. And listen, I go into these houses and I see the holes in the walls. The walls are like Swiss cheese. I see the deadbolts on the bedroom doors. I see the door frames that have been, you know, broken out. I see the level of dysfunction that is inside these walls, that is inside that house. I can't get that thing sold fast enough to get this family apart and out of this and get these kids out of this toxic environment. I just did one in particular over the weekend, and she was an adult daughter. I think she's about 19, 20 years old. And I went, and the house is just it's a complete wreck, just an utter wreck to even wake up to every day. And we went, she said, I can't let you in my my dad's bedroom because he locks the door. She and her mom are living on 2 blow-up mattresses, sharing a bedroom. And then we go to the father's bedroom. She actually tried the door and it was unlocked, and she opened it, and sitting right there, 3 feet from the door, is a camera facing the door. So he's, and the mom, I texted her, schedules, etc., were such that her daughter needed to let me in. She wasn't able to be home. And so I texted her and let her know that I was gone. And she said, I'm so embarrassed. And I can't, I need to get my daughter out of this environment. So those are the bulk of the situations that I come into. And so from the standpoint of timing, how much, what's the price tag on keeping kids in an environment like that? Another case where the dad is living upstairs in the master, the mom's downstairs, and the dad has had another woman coming into the home for months, taking the back staircase that he built to go inside of his bedroom. And then all 3 kids' bedrooms are next to his upstairs. It's dad, and then daughter, son, daughter bedroom. And this is what they've been living like this for 2 years. So, there's nothing that is worth keeping kids in an environment like that. So from my standpoint, get it done. I also am very cognizant of the fact that the house is also typically one of, if not the largest source of funds to pay for the divorce and to start this life over and to pay off debt. So it's vital that we get as much money as we can for the house. But I also am assessing what's the bandwidth of this case. What is the financial bandwidth, and what is the emotional bandwidth to even deal with repairs and to deal with getting it fixed up? What can we do that is going to give us the most bang for our buck? We're not dealing with an intact family that is capable of making their own decisions, that has a little bit of time, that isn't going to suffer financially by, redoing the floor and updating the kitchen. It's not usually the case here. Even if they have the money to do it, they don't have the bandwidth emotionally to do it. So we, almost everyone, it's carpet cleaning, deep cleaning, landscaping, curb appeal, that sort of thing. We can send people in to do that. And if we can get a fresh coat of paint, that's awesome. And so those are some of the typical things, but we're always weighing every case, and the emotional, the financial, the children. We're always weighing all of those factors before we can make a recommendation as to what to do.
Dr. Buscho, I'm not just going to let you react to that. That was heartbreaking, honestly.
I feel sorry for those children. They're going to make some therapist rich someday. But my experience is that when the conflict becomes intolerable, somebody's going to move. And, it starts out by moving to separate bedrooms. But even if it becomes intolerable to the parents, or intolerable even to the kids, somebody might move. I do have families that fight over who is going to move out. And one of the harder ones is when one wants to move out, but they can't because they need to sell the house before they know what they have to work with. So they can't really restart. So people like that will either nest within the home, or maybe rent a room in a house in a shared rental temporarily. But it's hard for people to move on if they don't know what their financial situation is going to be after the divorce. So the house does need to sell. But I would say that when they should move out is when the conflict is unmanageable, and the stress and tension is unmanageable. Even if it's not overt conflict, the kids can really pick up on the stress and tension in the home, and that's upsetting to kids too. So that would be when what I see is that people, when it becomes unmanageable, that's when people start trying to push somebody out, if not both of them.
So I've been directing our conversation here pretty substantially since the beginning of the hour, and I'm wondering if there's something that I've missed that either of you or both of you would like to say or comment on, on this topic of around the house. Something we've missed.
Dr. Ann?
Sure. I would say that paying attention to the kids when the house is going to be sold is really important to help prepare them for a move. I think kids can be taught, and it can be modeled for them, that change can also bring learning and new opportunities, and that's a good thing. And so to frame it that way and let kids help with the move, let kids help pack their things, let them help pick what their room is going to look like at their new home, whatever that is. Take things from the family home to both new homes if they're in two homes, so they have familiar things in both homes. And then I think having a ritual is really important, saying goodbye to the house. So that might be all together, the whole family, or it might be taking pictures that the kids can hold on to of the home. It might be planting a tree that they will be able to come back and look at sometime. I moved into one house when I got divorced. I moved into a home where the previous owner had laid down a slab of cement and put a handprint in of every member of the family into that slab of cement. I don't know if they were getting divorced, but I thought it was it could be a great ritual for kids leaving a home.
That's good advice.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that also, I think letting the kids follow what their parents are doing, right? I mean, it's like, how many of us have had a 1 or 2 year old and they fall down and they look at you to see, am I okay? And so so being cognizant and aware of, as a parent, how we're treating this is really going to be modeling, I think, how the kids are going to also, and I don't want to, I'm going to leave psychology to the professional here, but that's something that I have, that I tend to see as well. And also reminding the kids of what is going to stay the same. So we may be moving, but you still get to go to the same school. You're still going to go to, the bagel shop on your way or whatever it is, reassuring some of that. From the real estate standpoint of it, I can't emphasize enough to explore what the options are from what you can do versus what you want to do necessarily. So in other words, I see a lot of time and money spent on creating an arrangement, figuring out what they want to do, and then going in to execute it can't be done. And what I'm really talking about a lot of times is either a buyout, one spouse is going to keep it and refinance and all of that, and they spend all this time and money and coming, either it's court appearances or it's agreements, and then lo and behold, they can't qualify for a bicycle. I mean, lending guidelines change constantly. They're very difficult to keep up with. Jumbo mortgages are a whole other beast. Cash out refinances, have all kinds of qualification criteria. So before spending too much time going down the path of agreeing on what we want to do, check and see if it can be done. And then, so once you know your options, then decide which one's going to be the best one. The other thing is to do homework. When you want to keep the house, understanding how much is owed, knowing is the mortgage being paid on time? Has somebody gotten a forbearance that you didn't know about? What is the mortgage balance? Has there been maybe a loan modification or deferred principal payment where maybe you thought that the loan balance was something, lo and behold, it's $50,000 or $80,000 more than you thought it was. And I have a case right now, 3 years into the case. They go to the time for the husband to buy out the house. The wife has come and gone. They spent about 6 months with that. Now it's time to sell it. He couldn't qualify. I go to list it within 24 hours of getting appointed on the case. I do a title search and there's $250,000 in IRS liens. And there are 2 child support liens from apparently a love child that nobody knew about in 2003. So this impacts the equity. Equity's gone. So doing homework and doing proper due diligence early in a case is very, very important because it can impact what options are available.
Right. I muted myself because there were sirens going by. I think that's great advice. And I just wanted to say a couple of things from my own personal, not professional experience. When I got divorced, I kept the big apartment, and my ex-husband then moved to a smaller apartment. And this was something that I felt, really strongly about, that I was going to maintain the home for the kids and their bedrooms and all of that sort of stuff. And the expense of it, which wasn't easy for me. And then I went to his apartment. And I was like, I should have moved, because I thought, wow, this is so manageable. And like with managing, being, now when the children were with me, like a single parent, and having to juggle all of that stuff that comes along with, and, keep this place clean and organized and find stuff, even if there's a lost book or something, which room is it in? Well, you know what? In his apartment, it wouldn't take you that long to find it. And in mine, it was going to take a really long time. So, like what I thought I wanted turned out to not necessarily be something that was so great. And then ultimately I remarried and I sold that apartment and moved out of New York City to Westchester. It's still a very lovely place. And because my second husband had children and we were putting them together in homes, and I thought it was much better for both families to have to move to a new home together, so one set of kids wasn't displacing another set of kids in their own home. And when I did that, there was a real economy. It was so much less expensive for me to buy a house in Westchester. There was a real opportunity to leave a super expensive area, go to a not cheap, but less expensive area, and just be able to manage it all so much more easily with more space and less stress. And so again, I guess what I'm saying is that I fought tooth and nail for these things that I thought were so important to me and for my kids. Right. And then it's not that it wasn't important, but there were other things that came into it that later on with 2020 hindsight, I realized maybe I could have thought about that in a different way. And so I'd really encourage the attendees and the listeners to this webinar to really get some help to thinking this through and to thinking about what the options are, and see and find some way to value each of the things you're holding on to so that you can compare them to each other, right? So the money versus the conflict versus the attachment versus the neighborhood, versus all these sorts of things. My personal experience is that if you can do that, it's really, really helpful. What do you two think?
I really like what you're saying, because the divorce is a huge loss. And when you're in the middle of it, facing the loss of the home can just compound all that grief and loss. So you can't think all that clearly. When you're in the middle of the divorce, it's hard to take in information and make good decisions. So I think divorce coaches can be helpful, but I think we just have to recognize that when people are flooded, they're not necessarily going to make the best decisions. And 2 years down the road, they might think, that might have been a mistake. They might have agreed to something just to get past it, or they might have fought for something that probably wasn't the best thing for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really crunch the numbers and do the math. And sometimes that black and white math can have an impact on emotionally what you may ultimately decide to do, because it is important to, take into account how much does it cost for the gardener? How much does it cost for the pool man? How much does it cost to heat and cool this place? All of the things. While dad takes the kids to Disneyland on his time, and then it's, rice and beans again. Right. So, it's important to, I think it's definitely important to do that, to look at, what's ultimately the lifestyle going to be, and to choose the right professionals. Like Dr. Ann indicated, choosing having a divorce coach, versus relying on, lawyers are great at practicing law. But, I think that they would welcome the opportunity to have someone handle the emotional side of processing it, leave that to a professional. And just as you two and many others who specialize in the divorce space, choosing someone to handle the real estate aspect of your case, who is a specialist, who understands all of the dynamics that go on, is also very, very important as well.
Well, great. Thank you both so much for participating today. Laurel Starks, Dr. Ann Buscho, you've been really great. I'm Katherine Miller. Thank you all for attending. And until next time, take care.
Thank you for having us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.